Welcome to LexRex in conversation with the Chambers and Partners editors. I am really excited to be running this session again, and for those of you who've come before, you'll see that we have an entirely new panel, obviously with the exception of me. Apologies, you get me again. And yeah, it's really nice to be here. So just in terms of how this session will work today, we'll do some brief introductions, and then in essence the session will start in earnest. We have just under an hour left now, and we often have lots of kind of questions throughout the event. So yeah, any questions that you have, either stick them in the Q&A, stick them in the chat. I'm not going to kind of name names or anything like that, so there's nothing that's kind of off bounds in terms of questions that you want to ask. We normally have so much to cover that it's often quite tricky for us to kind of find time at the very end of the session. So literally, the minute you think of a question, please do stick it in either the chat and the Q&A, and I will try and weave it into my questions during the session. I don't think we have any fire announcements or any of the old-fashioned things that we used to have to do in face-to-face events. So let's crack on. So my name, for those of you who haven't met me before, I'm Victoria Moffatt. I'm the founder and managing director of LexRex Communications, which is a PR and marketing consultancy for the legal sector. Before I set up LexRex, I was a lawyer. I was in practice for around about 7 years. And so yeah, I've been on both sides of the coin essentially. So I know what it's like to be a lawyer and what it's like to work in practice, and I also know what it's like to run a business working just with lawyers and people who sell to lawyers. And yeah, I'm just delighted to be here. In terms of kind of directories and how I've found myself involved in directories, yeah, Legal 500, sorry, I swore, Legal 500 and Chambers, I'll just talk about Chambers. You know, they're two really important directories, really important for the legal sector. And I found myself kind of drafting submissions in practice, and then right from the very start of LexRex, you know, it was clearly an area that law firms, you know, really wanted to get ranked, really wanted to get listed, you know, really believed passionately in kind of their skills and, you know, the service that they were providing. But sometimes, and this is still the case now, you know, just couldn't quite work out how to write the submissions that could best kind of showcase those skills, that expertise, and the sort of high regard that their clients, barristers and other advisors kind of hold them in. So hopefully this session will help, and LexRex will help where we can. What I would say is on this session, and kind of in terms of the interest in our products and our free services, there's huge interest from all levels in this across the UK legal sector. You know, kind of top 100 firms right down to one-man bands and fantastic boutiques, and we want to help all of you. And we recognise that not everybody has budget to pay for our services, so we do try and help everybody from no budget right up to, you know, gold standard budget. So just really briefly, how can we help you? We have a dedicated newsletter that we send out during directories season called the Directories Bulletin. There's no requirement to pay to get hold of this bulletin. It comes out approximately every month throughout the whole of the directory season. It contains tips, hints, kind of more in detail guidance, early access to our events, deadline reminders, anything, lots and lots of different resources. And we know that that firms find this really useful. That's completely free. Get in touch if you want me to add you to that mailing list. We run training courses throughout directory season. So we have our introduction to Chambers, our introduction to Legal 500 courses. They start from £29.99 per person. We have our bespoke training, which we do on a team level or for specific functions. So if you have like a bids and tenders team, or if you have a particular sector focus, whatever you need, we can do that. And they start from around £79.99 per person. Our directories toolkit this year for the first time is online. This is our 18 chapter fully online training service, which again is a fantastic resource that takes you literally from cradle to grave throughout the entire directories process, helps you with the submission, benchmarking, referee management, kind of all of the submissions and forms, details and all of that. How to market your successes, what to do if you don't get in, what to do if you're stuck at a particular level. Everything is very comprehensive, and that's accessible from £500 plus VAT per licence, which is fantastic. And then finally, as you probably expect, we also have a consultancy and drafting service, which is our kind of gold standard service. But enough from me. What I would say is, if you book a discovery call with me after this session, in terms of more free resources, we will send you out a document which is essentially 15 questions to help you prepare for this year's directory season. Right, I went through that in 3 minutes, which is probably a record, and now it's time to introduce the panellists. Francois, would you like to go first?
Yes, my name is Francois Girl, and I've been at Chambers for, well, 11 years now, my sins. I've been a deputy editor on the UK team now for 6 years, and I suppose I'd say the sort of mainstays, the main areas in my wheelhouse are IEP, IT, media and entertainment, and I mean, simply just because of the number of categories and geographies within the UK we need to cover, I handle a lot more than that, but those, I suppose, would be my specialist areas of coverage. Lovely,
thank you. Eloise, are you okay to go next, please?
Yeah, I'm Eloise Haynes. I'm also a deputy editor on the UK Guide. I've been at Chambers since 2015, started out as a researcher and have been a deputy editor for just over 2 years now. I predominantly focus on sort of finance practice areas, in addition to transport and shipping and commodities, as well as environment and commercial contracts.
Lovely, thank you. And Catherine, over to you.
My name is Catherine Hughes. I am a deputy editor on the High Net Worth and Professional Advisors team. I have been at Chambers nearly 3 years now, and I became a deputy editor this summer. So our guide covers primarily private client work within the UK. That's really our focus.
Fantastic. Oh, that's perfect. Thank you. Okie dokie. Right. That's everybody introduced, so let's get cracking on. I've seen there's already some Q&As coming through, which is fab. I think the ones that I've seen we'll hopefully cover during the session anyway, so that's fantastic. Meet the panel, we've done that. Right, Q&A, let's crack on. So the hot question, the one that I think that is always on everybody's lips, is what makes a strong submission for the Chambers editors? And shall we start with Eloise?
So I think, to start with, a strong submission is one that's really quite relevant to the practice areas. I think a lot of time firms kind of fall into this trap of seeing a submission as this kind of general marketing tool for the whole firm, when really it's important to kind of really stay focused on the specific team and the practice area that submission is specifically for. So obviously, there might be things within the firm that are relevant to that practice area, which you can highlight. I'm not saying it has to just be completely like really tunnel vision, but I think it's important to make sure that you're really focused on what it is specifically about this team and these lawyers, which mean that they're best placed to serve clients in the area that you're putting the submission forward, rather than getting too caught up in what it is about the whole firm and all of the wider services that the firm offers. And I think you need to keep in mind that the researchers are going to be looking at a lot of submissions, and you want to make sure that yours stands out for the right reasons. So I think it's also trying to kind of be quite punchy and kind of succinct in the information that you're providing, because the researchers are going to be reading a lot of these submissions and they want to be able to kind of find the relevant information as easy as possible, rather than having to sort of trawl through reams and reams of sort of paragraphs about the work highlights and the firm itself. So yeah, trying to kind of be kind of succinct and punchy and getting the points that are really important from your perspectives that you want us to kind of be taking on board would be my top tip.
No, that's really helpful, particularly I think the point of you know, make it relevant to the team rather than kind of copying and pasting, you know, the same kind of narrative section across every single submission. And we've definitely seen that. We see that quite a lot, and I think that's probably comes down to a timing issue. But by the sounds of it, you know, even maybe, you know, 10 or 15 minutes spent just trying to kind of bespoke it to the team is going to help. Is that right?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, yeah, obviously we understand that everyone's pushed for time, and there's obviously going to be instances where you want to use the same work, highlight the different practice areas, because obviously lots of times things overlap. But I do think that it is really important when you're doing that to make sure that it focuses on specifically what it is that that team has done in that practice area, and try and make it as sort of bespoke to the submission in the area that you're focusing on. Otherwise it can get a bit sort of too general and not really kind of loses focus.
Yeah, no, I think that's really helpful advice. And is that the same, Catherine, for the high net worth guide?
Yeah, 100%. Definitely be focused in the information that you're providing. Like Eloise says, the researchers read through hundreds of these, and it will benefit your firm and the researcher for the work to be directly related to the area that you're submitting for. I think that's completely correct.
Oh, perfect. Okay, so moving on now, obviously each submission kind of has two sections. There's the narrative section with the case studies, and then there's a referee spreadsheet which kind of supports. So Francois, which is the more important element of the two, and how do they interplay?
Well, I mean, it's difficult to say really that one is more important than the other. I mean, they're both pretty much essential strands of the process. I mean, for instance, you could have a referee spreadsheet that from which arises some, you know, very healthy feedback levels, and even quite detailed feedback, which, you know, might sort of shed some light on sort of the nature, the level of the practice being asked about. But it's hard for us certainly to make a ranking off the bat if there's no submission, if there's nothing we can refer to that has sort of clearly and concisely laid out the manner of the work, and indeed, you know, examples of it to back it up, really. I mean, we are a feedback-based model, but I mean, really, we like to see submissions. I mean, they don't have to be, you know, big rambling documents. They don't have to be particularly couched in black letter law, and probably the less of that, the better. I mean, even if, say, a small firm, you know, with perhaps not a big marketing budget, would struggle to, you know, say, produce the same kind of submission that maybe like DLA Piper or something could, then kind of anything using our template is better than nothing. So yeah, it's hard to say which is more important. I mean, to stand a really good chance of being ranked the first time, you really want to have both. Yeah.
Okay, so it's important to have both, and well, actually that leads me quite nicely onto my next questions. So Eloise, what are you kind of looking for in respect to the case studies?
So again, I think with the work highlights, it's really important, I guess, to know your audience. Obviously, the researchers, they're going to have been researching that practice area. They're going to be they'll have done their research and be kind of have a good understanding of the area. However, most of them aren't legally trained or practicing lawyers in that area. So I think it's kind of trying to make the information as accessible as possible. I think for us, it's quite useful to kind of take the approach of maybe providing a kind of short, succinct summary at the start of the work highlight, just to kind of sum up what the matter actually entailed. And then obviously you can go into more detail. Fundamentally, what you should be aiming to tell us is what the matter was, what you did for your client and ultimately why it was significant or important for your client. That's kind of what we want to be able to understand from a submission and the work highlights that are provided. Obviously, also we understand that sometimes there might be kind of sensitive or confidential information that you can't provide. Most of you probably know that the template is currently split into sort of 10 publishable and 10 confidential matters. You don't have to stick to that split. If you want to give us 20 confidential matters, you can do. If you want to give us 20 publishable, you can. And obviously you can sort of retract certain information. I would kind of advise against providing us with work highlights where it kind of gets to the point that it's so vague that no one really knows what it actually means. But if you can't give the client name, you can kind of allude to the industry sector that they're in, or the type of matter. And obviously you don't have to give us the value if that's also confidential. But yeah, hopefully that
yeah, no, that's really helpful. No, that's really helpful. I mean, particularly the kind of the 3 elements, I think, in terms of, you know, what you're looking for, that's exceptionally useful. And actually, what was I going to say? Yeah, no, just really helpful. Oh, I know what I was going to mention. So is it still correct then, because we've tended to do this in the past, we almost have kind of 3 different types of ways of identifying clients. So there's kind of and I think for previous sessions we've been told that this is the best way to do it, but it's probably good to just check this with you. So, you know, the absolute ideal is we name the client, we understand which industry they're in, we know what the deal value is, we know as much as kind of possible. Obviously, like you say, that's not practical for, you know, for everybody, and particularly for kind of high net worth matters where, you know, confidentiality and kind of privacy is so fundamental. And then the sort of next stage down is you can't necessarily name the client, but you can kind of almost give like a narrative description of what the client is like. You know, maybe it's an international pop star, or maybe it's a UK listed steel company, or, you know, and then the matter description might be, you know, relatively detailed, but not detailed enough that you'd be able to identify the parties. And then the third kind of super secret squirrel one is you know, client A, and then literally kind of a bit of information about the transaction, and it's marked obviously as being confidential, and there's not as much detail, no deal value and that sort of stuff. Is that still the best way to kind of, you know, approach that and sort of decide, okay, where does our client fit, where does our case study kind of fit?
Yeah, no, I think that sounds sensible. I mean, I think obviously for different practice areas it's gonna vary in terms of how much information you can provide, and that will be true of all firms. So obviously if it's like a corporate M&A section, and quite a lot of matters are generally like public, and that like you would probably try and prioritize putting matters on there that have more information, because that's what all the other firms are going to be doing. But obviously when there's other sections which are more sort of sensitive information, and that's going to be true for everyone, then it's kind of going to be less of an issue.
Yeah, and are firms penalised? Are firms penalised if they give kind of 20 confidential matters where nobody's named?
No, basically what it just means that it ultimately means you won't end up with a work highlight in your editorial if you feature in the guide, because obviously we don't have anything that we're allowed to write for that section. In terms of, I wouldn't necessarily say penalised, but
it makes it more difficult for you, doesn't it?
It makes it a lot more difficult. And then also if you're being compared against firms that have been able to provide us with a lot more information, then obviously it's just slightly harder to make a kind of accurate comparison because you're not working with the same levels of information. But
yeah, and
I think it's rare that we'll find that you'll have people that have given us no information and there's people that have given us loads of information, because generally it's more kind of dependent on the area.
Yeah, well, that's it, isn't it? You know, if presumably, Catherine, if you're working, you'll be more used to seeing kind of super secret squirrel, very confidential, kind of internationally reaching, high-profile matters. If that's definitely the nature of the work, presumably that's just what you expect to see. Is that?
Yeah, of course. We really wouldn't expect to see any client names, to be honest with you. The description of the work is far more important to us, and we totally understand that even that sometimes has to be as minimal as possible. But like Eloise says, it is the same across basically every firm working in this practice area. So you will be compared like and like.
Yeah.
So it's definitely not something that we're penalised for in our section at all.
Perfect. I assume that was the case. Okay, so moving quickly then on to the referee spreadsheet. What are you looking for in kind of a perfect referee spreadsheet, Francois?
Yeah, well, I mean, in terms, I mean, for a perfect spreadsheet, I suppose most important thing is that the referees are willing and able to get back to us, and I think have been apprised beforehand that the researcher getting in touch with essentially the first contact they hear from Chambers may not necessarily be for the practice area say the submission that they might be expecting if they are, for instance, referees across practice areas. So that's that. First of all, they should be aware that a Chambers researcher might get in touch with requesting an interview for perhaps another practice area. They are, however, of course, required to ask about the other practice areas or say teams that they are being referred for. But it's good for the referees to have that in mind. So that I suppose the referees should be briefed to know sort of what to expect from our approach in the process. They should be able to have the time to be able to help us. That's really important. Another thing is, if you're trying to promote individual lawyers that haven't been ranked yet, try if you can to include referees that can speak to all of them. Like sometimes you get spreadsheets where it seems that the referees are kind of hogged by one or two partners. I mean, maybe that's all right if you want to really absolutely get your foot in the door to start with an individual ranking, but a bit later down the line, that might actually hinder the impression that we get of, say, the breadth of talent in a team. Another thing is, if we're looking at practice areas that are contentious or else ones that where often recourse to counsel for particularly say abstruse or tricky points of law is common, then it's not a bad idea to have a few barristers on there, because and if you've worked with barristers who are ranked, then their word carries a lot of weight. But also, I mean, barristers generally, their word carries a lot of weight with us. So that would be a good idea. It's also worth understanding that as they are quite sort of sophisticated referees, again, they should be made aware that perhaps the first contact they get from Chambers isn't necessarily for your submission. It might be for another one. It might be for another category handled by the firm, say. So that's something to be aware of. And I suppose perhaps the most simple point of about what makes up a good referee spreadsheet is use the maximum allowance of 20 referees per submission that you can. Because I mean, really, I wouldn't be so crude as to characterize it as a numbers game, but the more that you get through, the better. And I mean, you almost never get 100% response rates. So you're shortening your odds if you have 20 referees. I should add no more than 20 referees, please. That can make us kind of cross.
I think that's really helpful, actually. And is it still the case that Chambers sees kind of 30 to 35% as a good referee engagement level? I
mean, it's kind of a ballpark figure, but I would say yes. North of that would be a pretty good haul.
Yeah. Okay.
And sometimes you get more, and a lot of the time you don't. I think COVID has sort of interfered a bit with that, perhaps depressed it slightly. I mean, again, I should be careful what I'm saying here, because this isn't, perhaps backed up with this is more of a qualitative assessment than a quantitative one that I'm making. But yeah, so the more referees within the the maximum allowed you put forward, the better your chances.
No, I think actually it's fine, and sometimes we can rely on our gut feeling, can't we, with something, and that's often the case. And I mean, COVID's affected so much, hasn't it, in terms of how we work and how we live, that I think it would be thoroughly understandable if that has sort of depressed sort of referee response rates, because we've all got so much to kind of think about and do. I've just had a really interesting question actually. I don't know if you'll be able to answer this, so do tell me if it's a no. And I'll probably ask Eloise and Catherine this one. What do the referees ask precisely? What do you actually ask them?
Give you like a general sense.
Yeah.
The researchers don't stick to a strict script, just because we like our conversations with the referees to be quite conversational, and we encourage them to kind of bounce off what the referee is saying, I guess, and follow up and in terms of that. But generally, the focus of our researchers' interviews is to sort of understand the services that the firm have been providing the referee with. So they might ask them about sort of the type of work specifically, again, just to get a sense if it's actually like relevant for the practice area that they're putting forward. So I would try and sort of make sure that the referees you're putting forward are actually relevant to the practice area you're putting them forward to, because if you want them to talk about your banking team, but actually they're talking about someone in like the real estate department, then that's not necessarily
not helpful, presumably.
not that helpful, because it skews the information we have. But no, they'll be wanting to know what it is exactly that the firm's been doing for the referee, and then it kind of follows on from that is sort of understanding the referee's experience of working with the firm. So both in terms of sort of the firm generally in terms of client service, but then also who it is specifically that they've been working with, the lawyers, and then also understanding, I guess, if they individually have any particular kind of strengths or attributes that make them a kind of go-to person in this area, and what it is that makes them use them. We do also, I guess, try to get both sides of the coin, so we ask if there are any improvements as well, and just kind of get that holistic sense of the experience. But I mean, most of the time it's all very nice things, because obviously you've hopefully selected people that are going to say very nice things about you. But yeah, no, generally it's to get an understanding of what it is the firm's done for the referee and how the referee has found working with the firm, and also the individuals specifically that they deal with.
That's really helpful. And is that the same for the high net worth guide, Catherine?
I think the work question is possibly slightly different. So we tend to get a lot of referees who are other professionals. So they would tend to work with the lawyers on a slightly more regular basis, and also slightly more varied. So you might have multiple mutual clients. So we wouldn't necessarily be looking for the specifics of what you have been doing with the lawyer for each individual client that you deal with together, but just the sort of work that you would tend to use that lawyer for. If they have a particular expertise in a certain kind of trust, or if they're particularly strong at cross-border US-UK work, that sort of thing. What do you tend to use this person for? Where do you rate them in terms of work? And then the question with regard to sort of how you find dealing with them is fairly consistent across the board. But yeah, the work would be a little bit more slightly broader question.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. That makes sense. So another quick question that I've just had, turning back to the kind of publishable, non-publishable thing. Somebody's asked is, if you've marked the work as non-publishable, can you still include confidential info and kind of be assured that it won't be published? I'm assuming that's yes.
Yeah, we very much err on the side of caution.
Yeah.
So yeah, if something crops up in a publishable section and then it says confidential next to it somewhere else in the submission, then we try and steer well clear. So yeah, we very much avoid that.
Yeah, no, I assume that would be the case, and just in terms of the 15 or so years I've been doing this, that's certainly been my experience, that Chambers is extremely cautious with anything that looks like it could be, smells like it could be, or in any way might be confidential, just to provide some reassurance on that front. I've had somebody else ask, is there a kind of minimum number or an optimum number of case studies that they should include?
So on the template it's 20.
That's your maximum, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, again, some of this depends on like the size. If obviously if you are someone who's like a solo practitioner, we wouldn't necessarily expect you to be filling out like 20 work highlights. And I think there is a balance between staying relevant and just filling space for the sake of it, because I think it then becomes detrimental if it looks like you're padding out a submission with work that isn't actually relevant to the area that the submission is for. But also conversely, if you put a submission in and it's got like one work highlight, then that's probably not going to stand you in the best stead either. So it is a bit of a balancing act. But I mean, we would expect for most firms that have like a reasonable sized team, that we would hope that I would aim for trying to sort of do 20. And again, it's a good opportunity, as Francois was saying, if you've got people who are trying to get in the rankings, is to make sure that you are both having referees that can speak to them, but also including them in the work highlights as well, because it's like all well and good you saying that these individuals are great and that we should be recognizing them, but we do also like to kind of see some evidence of them practicing in the area as well. So yeah, making sure that you are sort of spreading the work highlights out amongst the team and the individuals that you want to see recognized is also a good approach to take.
That's really helpful, actually, really super helpful, particularly on the point around case study stuffing. You know, we will often come across you know, really good firms who and really good teams who are doing really good work, but the work actually sometimes is quite repetitive, you know, as you would expect if you're working in a specialist area. And sometimes we say, do you know what, actually, you know, let's just take a few of these out, because there's absolutely no point just including kind of 20 of exactly the same matter. It's nobody's going to love us for that by the time they get to matter 16 or whatever. Okay, so I have some more questions, just bear with me. Right, so this is quite an interesting one, actually, and I think I know the answer to this. So when the case study section is being filled out, do you want to know how a case was run? Do you want the technical details? Francois, are you okay with that one?
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah, that's I mean, certainly we want the gist and what the outcome meant for the client. You know, was it a success? As for sort of the details of how a case was run, yeah, it's hard to say. I would try not to overload it with that. But if there was like a particularly important, say, you know, victory in the process, so even if, say, the matter has not yet been fully resolved, but you know, the outcome of a particular proceeding during its course is something that you want to draw attention to, you know, worked out well for the client and for the firm, then yes, do mention that. At the same time, there is a limit really to, I would say there should be a limit to how technical and procedural a work highlight can get, because as has been mentioned, a lot of our researchers are not legally trained, and even if they are or they have some level of legal education, they may not be familiar with procedure in that area. So I think at all times keep in mind that you're explaining this to lay people, essentially. Make that this sort of the default assumption. I mean, sophisticated lay people, but nonetheless non-lawyers. I mean, if you can concisely explain why it is that this particular point in the case is pivotal, then please do. Again, being mindful of not giving sort of too extended a screed or something that might make it difficult for concentration and for summary as a publishable work, I'd say, if that be the case. I mean, I think neck, you know, that's less of a concern.
Perfect. No, that's great. And is that the same, would you say, for you, Catherine, as well?
Yeah, definitely. It doesn't really help anybody to get too technical. I think it's far better to focus on the work that was done and why it was important both for the client, for your firm, why you're including it. Does it show, a particular area of expertise? Are you including it because it's done by a more junior member of the team? I would generally focus on that. The technical side isn't necessarily the most helpful when we do have to read through so many firms' submissions as well.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. That makes perfect sense. Okay, so the questions are still coming through thick and fast. So thank you for everybody that's submitted them. I will get to you all if I possibly can. If it's taking me a while to come to you, it's not personal. Really, really quickly, pet hates, because I think, whilst we've talked about what a good submission looks like, I also think actually it can be really helpful to talk about the things that you absolutely hate that drive you insane. So Eloise, do you mind kicking us off with those?
Including like mad appendices on the end of submissions where it's like,
ooh,
oh, here's 20
that?
I've had it before where a firm's included like an extra like 160 pages with like links to like every single case they've done in like the last 2 years.
Wow.
And it's just like, we're not going to read it. With the best will in the world, nobody has the time to trawl through all of that, and it's not the best use of your time or ours. So yeah, I think kind of like people try and outsmart the submission and think, oh, we'll try and add in all this extra stuff, and it really doesn't do you any favors. Like also trying to include like 5 different work highlights in one, that's also really annoying because it's then really difficult to actually understand what each one was, because they've all just been kind of amalgamated into this like super work highlight, which just isn't very useful.
Yeah. So conciseness, you value conciseness.
Yes, we do. I think it's just because, as we've all been saying, that the volume of submissions that we get and the amount of information that we have to kind of process and go through. And sort of then trying to kind of play the system by overloading us with information just kind of becomes counterproductive. So yeah, I think for me that's something that can be a frustration.
Yeah, no, that's completely understandable. Go on, Catherine, what are your pet hates? Or your number one pet hate?
First and foremost, referees not knowing their referees.
What do you mean?
Please tell your referees that you would put them forward to us. Because it's really not, it doesn't help anybody if they don't know. They won't get back to us because they don't want to be contacted in the first place. And we can find, particularly with our practice area, it is highly confidential, it's highly sensitive, highly emotional. If you have not told your referees you have put them forward, if you've not properly given their consent, you're doing yourself so much harm. Number one thing, please tell them, like we give you notice that they're going to be contacted soon, so please get in contact with them then so that they expect it as well. That's the number one thing. It will massively increase your response rate as well. So yeah, that definitely.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And Francois, go on, what's your number one pet hate?
Well, only one.
Yeah, sorry. I'm sure we could probably fill a webinar with them.
Well, I mean, excessive numbers of referees, exceeding the referee allowance. It's unfair on firms that play by the rules, and we do notice, and it does leave us rather ill-disposed. I mean, which isn't to say that active punitive measures will be taken, but it might mean that we sort of take with a pinch of salt this incredible raft of hagiography that comes through. If we know that you've put through double the number of referees, excessive numbers of work highlights, like you can perhaps really stretch perhaps a bit beyond, like maybe one, say over 20, if there's something you're absolutely bursting to include and it's a bumper harvest of highlights this year, but really don't go over that, because again, it's a sort of fairness issue, a division of time. The thing that's kind of ground my gears most this year is particularly with national firms, when they essentially put forward work that is being led from London and conceal it as having been done or led from a regional office. And it's something that we can quite easily check. We can check if, say, for example, it's on the London submission. We can look up where the partners are based, where the firm promotes them as being, where their sort of prime location is. So, I mean, we will find out, and it's just rather annoying to actually have to do all this sleuthing. We would rather, you know, say for the Newcastle office or whatever of a national firm is, if it's just clearly laid out that perhaps it's directed by a London partner, but Newcastle office did this, was central to this part, this strand of the work highlight, we will be perfectly well impressed by that. That's okay. Just, please don't force us to sleuth.
Yeah.
Because we will notice.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair enough. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, noted. And actually, it's going. I imagine that it's going to be quite interesting with the working patterns and how much they've changed kind of during COVID. How this actually pans out in kind of this year's submissions. So that probably is something that people putting together the submissions really need to give some thought to how they actually approach that and make sure that they're doing that sort of strategically in terms of make a decision about how you're going to manage it and then follow that through across the submissions, I imagine. Right, I have loads of questions which I'm going to try and get through to now, and I'm going to kind of theme them if I can. So a couple of questions about referees. So one of the questions about the referee is, are you looking more for the referee's experience of working with the lawyer rather than the type of the matter? I'm not quite sure I fully understand the question, but I think what this questioner is trying to say is the referee more interested in how it is to work with the lawyer rather than the technical elements of what they're doing? I think that's what she's trying to ask. Catherine, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, sure. I would say it's a little bit of both. I mean, we largely look for how they find dealing with the lawyer, but obviously the technical level of the work is important to a certain extent as well. But really, we'd be looking on how that person rates that lawyer for whatever reason, and how technical the work is will presumably feed into that person's experience of the lawyer.
No, that's perfect, thank you. The other question I had around referees is, when in the process do you actually tell the firms that you're going to be contacting the referees, approximately? Francois, do you want to answer that one?
Right, well, we have a research schedule on our website, and well, first of all, it will tell you when submission deadlines are for a given practice area, and that's usually, things are evolving. It's always worth having a look at this, and we're in the process of working on our comms to make sure that we're better perhaps than we have been in the past at sort of broadcasting when these things are going to happen. But there is a research schedule on the website, which is it's pretty straightforward. It's pretty easy to use, and that will tell you when the research will be conducted, which is often, it's quite a, for some categories that might be a period of say 2 to 3 months. You would generally expect most referees for that to have been contacted in the first half of that, to get just out of courtesy, to give people time to manage their calendars and so on. It's harder to say to give anything more detail than that, because different researchers will work in different ways. But generally, if a practice area says, for example, being researched February through to say April, then you should expect the referees to be contacted earlier within that period than later.
Sorry.
No, please go ahead.
I was just going to say, you are also welcome to get in touch with the specific researcher that's listed for the section you're interested in as well, because their details will be available when it is set to researching on the schedule. And they will be able to provide you with a little bit more specific information in terms of either when they are planning on contacting referees or when they have been contacted. So you can sort of give your client referees a little nudge to say, oh, maybe check your inbox for an email from Chambers, or please look out for an email from Chambers.
Perfect. Yeah, no, that's really, really helpful. And then just one more question, I think, on referees. If an individual is noted as a reference for sort of several different practice areas, how is that managed by the researcher? Will they get more than one call, or will the call encompass all of the different practice areas? How does that work? Sorry, Catherine, can I ask you that one?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so the call should encompass the different practice areas. We try to cover everything that one referee has been put forward for in one call, just for the purposes of time management, to be honest. And then the researcher is tasked with asking about each practice area and each lawyer that they have been put forward for. So they should all be covered in the one call. It shouldn't be multiple contacts.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, because obviously the referees aren't going to want to be called by like 10 different people about 10 different matters. I can see that would quickly get annoying. Right, so we still have quite a few questions to get through. One thing that's come up is, and I know we've sort of briefly talked about this earlier, and I think from memory you're not quite sure about this yet. This year's submission and this year's deadlines, do you know if the submission format is going to stay the same? Are there any major changes up and coming? And that one's for Eloise.
So the deadlines are still to be confirmed, although it's unlikely that you'll be expected to submit anything before December. The deadlines generally get confirmed post the launch of the UK guide, so that's obviously coming this month. So yeah, hopefully we'll have some more sort of specific information for you in due course. And in terms of the submission templates as well, there's a chance that they might change, but as far as we haven't really heard anything specific on that, so I don't think there's going to be any major changes, because that would have been decided by this point now in all likelihood. So yeah, sorry, that wasn't a very definitive answer, but everything I think confirmed, but shouldn't be any drastic changes.
Yeah, and actually now is a good point, I think, to pick up on the changes that were made last year and just have a quick chat about those. So obviously last year, on the back of a slightly negative bit of press coverage from the previous year, in which I can't remember who it was, a partner was basically saying he didn't want to be included in Chambers until Chambers was ranking kind of 50% male, 50% female, if I've remembered that correctly. And Chambers, very quickly, to its credit, introduce a section onto the form, I basically putting the onus back onto law firms and saying, look, if you have female lawyers, if you have people of colour who are your lawyers, if you have people with disabilities, if you have anybody who isn't the kind of middle-aged, white, middle-class, privately educated lawyers on your books, then tell us about them. And if you tell us about them, then obviously we can rank them. And this is a question that's come up actually in the course of this session. Have lawyers responded well to that? Are we seeing now greater numbers of people who don't look like your typical ranked lawyer? Catherine, can I ask you about that one?
Yeah, so I think our figures for most of our guys this year have shown improvement within gender diversity. I think that those specific figures can be accessed on the website for each individual guide as well. That is obviously something we have been trying to work on as well with regard to who we're interviewing to. So I know from our high net worth guide, so last year we set ourselves a soft target of trying to hit 50-50 in terms of those we interview, and this year we're doing much stronger tracking of who we do interview or who we ask to, and then who we do interview, and if that changed, for what reason. And I think that's something the UK guide is doing as well. So it's something we are trying to track so that we have better figures for.
Lovely. No, that's perfect. Thank you. I think we had just the one question on that. So let's have another look at some more of the questions that we have. Where's it gone? Just another one on referees, actually, that I missed the first time around. Are we better to use client referees or professional referees, or an even split? I know what I would say to this, but I'm interested in what you guys would say. So, Francois, what do you think? What's your advice on that front?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think it depends rather a lot on the practice area. I would say, as long as it's a fair reflection of people you deal with, or who you think will give perhaps the most articulate and weighty references to you. I mean, Yeah, I think it's something to that I think the firm practitioners will know probably best themselves. There certainly aren't any sort of strict criteria or quotas, like from our point of view. I mean, certainly say like third-party practitioners, you know, these are specialists, these are people who know what they're talking about, and they will certainly probably come up with more, I mean, quotable, well, certainly that's a bit harsh, but they are likely to come up with more quotable and I suppose punchy references, punchy in a good way, than perhaps the lay client. But yeah, like if your practice involves sort of working alongside or getting opinions from, say, you know, accountants or insolvency practitioners, as well as dealing with clients, then I suppose I would say your spreadsheet should aim to reflect that balance. But yes, you know, you might decide, well, maybe a few more professional services people wouldn't go amiss, as long as they're able to reply. I mean, so in short, there aren't really any sort of minima or maxima about this. I think it's something best left to your judgment. But I suppose, yeah, I mean, professional services people, you know, are experts that can help. But also, you know, we are a client's guide ultimately, so shouldn't lose sight of that.
Perfect.
I would say ours is, sorry to interrupt you. Ours is slightly different. We would certainly expect to see more professionals put forward as referees, whether that's accountants or bankers or practitioners in other jurisdictions. We would tend to see a lot more of them than clients, and that's certainly what we expect as well.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, I mean, that makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Given the area that you're covering. Okie doke. So I have 3 more questions. I'm conscious we have precisely 4 minutes. So let's be snappy. Okie dokie. Let's have a look. Where is it? Oh, okay. So one of the questions basically is around what happens if you move firm, you know, kind of halfway through the referee period. Halfway through the reference period, and if that happens to you, and probably regardless of whether you take the work with you or whether it remains with your previous firm, are you able to talk about the work that you have done in your old firm if you're putting together a submission for the period of time that you've been at your new firm, if that makes sense? Eloise, are you okay to answer that one?
Yeah. So that's fine. What I would just say is, obviously, if you are putting firm work that you did at your previous firm on the submission of your new firm, just to be very clear about that when you're in the work highlight write-up. But no, we do totally understand that obviously if you've changed firms sort of mid-year, then that is going to impact your ability to sort of necessarily demonstrate as active a practice as you have in previous years. So yeah, we tend to obviously not hold that against people, and you tend to kind of get a year of grace to sort of settle in, as it were, just to make it as fair as possible, really.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Okay, so I have a question here around unranked lawyers who are looking for an individual ranking. So basically the question is around, you know, if you've got kind of 5 lawyers who are already, 5 partners who are already ranked, 5 people who are kind of up and coming, we want to obviously put attention onto these people. Do we need to keep mentioning these people who are already ranked and have been ranked for many years? Or actually, can we focus on these new people without these people being kind of dumped off and dropping down the rankings? How does that work? I think that's in terms of both the section around those people, but also in the case studies. So, you know, if we're highlighting the work of, say, 5 people, but there's only 20 case studies, if we don't include the stuff for the states people or whatever, is that going to affect negatively on them? Or, you know, how it's a good question, to be fair, particularly for the bigger teams. And how should a team manage that? Eloise, probably one for you, actually.
Yeah, no, I think when we are looking at submissions, we are always kind of looking at them in the context of how big the team is, because obviously that is going to impact how many work highlights someone can have. Obviously, if you're a 2-man team, then you can have 10 each, and you know, that's lovely, isn't it? But if there's more of you, then you have to kind of share them around a bit. I think it's probably good to try and make sure that people are still getting some kind of mention on a submission, but we do generally understand that, hang on, if there's like people that aren't ranked that have more work highlights, then we generally take that because the firm's trying to promote them, and it's not that because the other people have kind of dropped off the face of the earth in terms of their practice. So yeah, that's fine. I think just ensure that there is still some kind of mention somewhere that people are still doing stuff, rather than us thinking they've retired and
They're not playing golf. Yeah. Right, I'm conscious we're running out of time, so I want to put my thank you slide up. These are just the people who've kind of supported our event today, shared it with their kind of followers and their their clients and all the rest of it. So thank you to these people. We may just have time for one more question. If you have asked a question and we haven't come back to you, you can get in touch with me here on any of these sort of ways of getting in touch. Ring me, whatever, and that's absolutely fine. What else was I going to say? I've completely lost what I was going to say. Oh, the one last question is, do we like subheadings to avoid the dreaded wall of text? Catherine.
Yes. Any way you can make your matters look slightly more presentable is always great. And if you can tell us what your paragraph is supposed to be illustrating, then that's even better as well. But yeah, definitely anything that makes it look more understandable, more structured. Fantastic.
Perfect. Right, I think we've probably covered as many questions as we could. Like I say, if I haven't come around to your question, I'm really sorry. We've had about 25 questions, which I've tried to manage as best I can, so please don't be offended if I've missed yours. We are now 1 minute overdue, so we probably need to go. Just to say to the Chambers team, thank you so much. It's been really insightful. I hope that you've enjoyed yourselves, and that it's perhaps given you an idea of the sorts of questions and the sort of challenges that that law firms have when they're putting together their submissions. And yeah, any last comments from anybody?
Nothing that springs to mind.
Thank you very much.
They can get in touch with us as well if they have other specific questions. That's fine.
Definitely.
Perfect. Oh, thank you. Anyway, thank you everybody who's taken the time out to spend some time with us this afternoon. Like I say, any questions at all, anything you need to know, yeah, just drop me a line. And yeah, I'll hope to. Well, I know I'll definitely probably see you three at some point soon, or be in touch with you. But for everybody else, thank you. Over and out. And I hope you enjoyed yourselves. Found this session useful. Thanks again. Bye.